TikTok is never going to be banned or sold. Hi, my name is Thomas. Welcome to my channel. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I do have to explain that I was an employee of TikTok. I was a technical solutions consultant. And the last I worked for them was the end of 2024 when I was laid off. But this video contains no insider info. I did not work on the team that was in charge of political lobbying or negotiations, nor did I work at a level where I had access to C-suite or management that would have more info on the ongoing negotiations. So a brief history of the TikTok ban bill and how we got here. The idea for banning TikTok from America was actually originally spearheaded by President Donald Trump in 2020. However, there was no real progress towards legislation that effectively banned TikTok until the spring of 2024, when a bill passed the House of Representatives and the Senate and then was signed into law by President Joe Biden in April of 2024. The bill was called Protecting Americans from Adversary-Controlled Applications, which is a really fancy way and a lot of words for saying that they wanted to ban TikTok under the guise of national security because TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese parent company. And by extension, they believe that because of that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, had some level of control over ByteDance, and if they wanted to, they can use the data that TikTok app collects on Americans for some sort of nefarious propaganda purpose. The bill gave TikTok roughly 9 months to sell the company or divest it. Sell would mean that ByteDance gives up complete control of TikTok and sells off all of their shares of the company. Divest means you give up a majority stake so that technically you are no longer the controlling party of a company. The original deadline set in the bill was January 19th, 2025, which is the day before a new president takes term. On January 20th, Donald Trump took office, and one of his first acts was to issue an extension on the ban. He issued a second extension in April of this year when that first ban ran out, and then he issued an extension for the third time last week on June 19th when the extension ran out again, and TikTok has yet to be sold or divested. I think at this point it's fair to say that TikTok is probably never going to be banned. I mean, you have a bill in place. It clearly states that TikTok should have been banned in January if it wasn't sold off, and well, it hasn't been sold off and TikTok continues to operate. So why can TikTok never be banned? The first reason is that TikTok is just a really popular app. In the United States, it has over 170 million active users. Statistically, that is roughly half of the US population. Arguably, TikTok is the most popular consumer social media app that's currently in use right now, more popular than Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, whatever platforms that you may think of. So banning TikTok would be deeply unpopular. And I think Trump and the rest of his administration understand that, which is why they keep issuing extensions. The second reason that TikTok can never be banned is that, well, it's too big and too valuable of a company. I'm not talking about just the creators that make a living through TikTok, but there are a lot of small businesses that basically operate solely through TikTok. They get exposure and awareness to new customers through the platform, and then they sell their products directly on TikTok through the TikTok shop. But beyond that, there is no real appetite to ban the app, because when you ban the app, you begin to destroy its value. So think what happens if TikTok was actually banned today. It would have to shut down operations. If it were banned for a long enough period of time, the company would start shuttering operations by laying people off, closing offices. And in that case, the company eventually dwindles to nothing in value. It's no good as a company if you destroy all of the infrastructure and the processes that was required to run the company in the United States. And that's why an extension keeps getting issued. Because ultimately, the goal of the bill was never to ban TikTok. If they wanted to ban TikTok, they would have just written the bill to ban TikTok immediately. They wouldn't have put 9 months of a time period into the bill to allow for a sale or divestment. So the goal of the bill was always to force TikTok to sell. So why hasn't TikTok sold? So if the goal of the bill was always to force TikTok to be sold off, then why hasn't it been sold? Well, I just don't think TikTok can be sold. So let me explain. The way that tech companies are evaluated is generally on a revenue multiple. So if I had a tech company and we produced $10 million in revenue per year, a fair valuation of my company is 10 times the revenue. So in other words, $100 million or 10 million times 10. The problem is TikTok is a really big company in terms of how much money it makes. Most estimates put TikTok's annual revenue in the United States alone somewhere between $8 and $12 billion. If we split the difference and just assume it's $10 billion, that means a fair valuation of TikTok in the US alone is $100 billion. Now, $100 billion is quite a lot of money. That is a sum that is beyond any individual person to reasonably purchase. For example, even Elon Musk, the world's richest person, had to borrow quite a lot of money from banks and institutions in order to fund his acquisition of Twitter, which was $44 billion. I would also argue that if Twitter is worth $44 billion, then TikTok should easily be worth 3, if not 4 times that number. So at $100 billion of a valuation, what kind of conglomerate or fund or company can actually afford to purchase TikTok outright? Well, if you think about it, the only companies that have that much cash on hand to absorb TikTok outright are the ones that you would expect: Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon. The problem is, if any of these big tech companies actually move to acquire TikTok, it would be shot down by the Federal Trade Commission, because a combination of TikTok with any of these other tech companies would certainly create a monopoly. So if these big tech companies are never going to be allowed to acquire TikTok and no one else can feasibly come up with $100 billion, then essentially TikTok can never be sold. It can never be sold because no one can afford to buy it. I think it's important to note here that one of the goals of the bill was to force TikTok to be sold under duress. In other words, the government believed that, hey, if we put this ban in place, then surely the parent company of TikTok, ByteDance, will look at the situation and say, we should sell the company. I mean, it's better than having the company being outright banned. And in that situation, it would be called under duress, and maybe ByteDance would value the company at a lower stake, say instead of $100 billion, maybe $50 billion. However, ByteDance called their bluff. They stared them dead in the eyes and said, we don't think you're actually going to ban our app. Our app has really popular sentiment here in the United States. It is used by half of all Americans. It is a major contributor to the economy, and we just don't think that it would be a very popular option for you to ban the app for no good reason. I also want to say that the US government has never produced any actual evidence that the data collected by TikTok was being used by the Chinese Communist Party or ByteDance for any nefarious reason. Ultimately, the decision on whether or not to sell TikTok resides with the parent company ByteDance. And if you are the parent company, why would you agree to sell this app? You've built it up over time. It has extremely valuable technology, which is the recommendation algorithm that is the best in social media right now. Why would you sell it off under duress or under force because another government passed a bill to force you to sell it off with no real justification? If TikTok is never actually going to be banned and it's never actually going to be sold, then what's actually going to happen? I think one of two things will happen. One, either Trump issues some sort of executive order that makes it so that TikTok satisfies the conditions of the bill. So maybe TikTok put some processes into place that satisfies like the data collection and the data privacy issues, so that the US government is more assured that the data is harder to misuse. Ultimately, I do think that unless they repeal the ban, which I don't think they actually would, that President Donald Trump would just keep issuing extensions indefinitely. So that's it. That's all I've got for this video. Hopefully you found this helpful and educational. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video. Until then, take care of yourself, and if you can, someone else too.